So with that, let's talk about on our day 2 of Angela's Ashes. Yesterday we answered questions that you had. Today I'd like you to give me some reactions, and so I definitely want people that did not talk yesterday to be able to chime in first. But also, if you had a question you wanted answered yesterday and I didn't get a chance, I didn't ask you, or you want to know what it is, and feel free not to give me a reaction, but give me the question, okay? All right? And all this kind of stuff is part of our casual conversation on Angela's Ashes, okay? So who did not get a chance to speak yesterday at all? All right, Aiden, start us off then.
This is more like debatable question.
Okay.
She can have different opinions on.
Sure.
Are Angela's sisters good or not? Are they evil or are they good? Or are they in the gray?
All right. Anybody else want to weigh in on that? Are these sisters? Philomena, love that name. All right. Extra credit for anybody that names their first female child Philomena. Heck with it. Boy or girl, Philomena, go for it. All right. It's 2020. You can name your kid whatever you want. All right. Go ahead, Olivia. What was your thoughts?
So I feel like in today's day and age, that would be seen as bad for shaming her for her choices, who she married and all that. But back then, that was just the way it is. If a woman gets pregnant out of wedlock, they're ashamed to the family and all that stuff. So, I mean, now looking on it, we think oh my God, I can't believe they'd say that to their cousin or whatever. That they're treating her that way. But then back then, that was just how it was.
Sure. I like what you said. They shamed her for her choices. And if you think about this carefully, it's not choices. It was one choice, right? The bad choice that Angela made was at the party, where she might have had too much to drink and made a bad decision with Malachi and got herself pregnant. One choice, one bad choice. And what does she pay for that bad choice? I mean, you see the first chapter is all. Okay? Chapter 2, she hits the lottery and she's rich and she spends the rest of her life swimming around in a yacht boat, right? Now, the book is titled Angela's Ashes for a reason. It is what's left of her at the end. And it is, literally ashes in that sense. If this was my mother, I mean, it would traumatize me, And so, one bad choice, and like Olivia said, it's the way it was. Those sisters forced them in, shamed her into marrying. And it's easy for us to say today, that's the way it was back then. Or, somebody asked if they had money, would they be able to save their kids? Probably not. I think I read somewhere a good 25% of most of the kids died before they were 5 years old in the 1800s. I think that's when and then it was 50% died before they reached adulthood. It's just the way it was. You had 8 kids, 4 of them died, and he just went on. And we say that because a lot of times we're reading history books. It's kind of like, I remember hearing about the Titanic all the time as a kid. 1,200 people died. It was terrible, and 1,200 people died in this Titanic. You watch the movie and you get attached to a couple people, and at the end, when Leonardo is bobbing up and down like a popsicle, you're all, poor Leonardo, right? Because you got to know him for a couple hours. He becomes a person. He's not a number. When you look at encyclopedia, 1,200 people dead. Well, tough break, But then when you get to know somebody, it's totally different. Oh, God, I love when the phone rings. It's Corey Simmons. Ashanti Perez. I've never heard of her at all. She just gave me the peace sign because I guess she's leaving. And I can tell she's smiling under her mask, which tells me that she hates me and hates my class, and it breaks my heart. But I'll send her down. All right. Thanks. Bye. All right, you're good. Um,
Got Ed in that.
Glad we got to record that for all of posterity's sake, huh? So, this idea that if you got pregnant, you were forced down the aisle and got married, and then you were married forever, is obviously way different than the world we live in, okay? And have a good day. I'll see you Thursday. That idea of being married for the rest of your life has changed radically in the last 30 years. Divorce has become common, and it became accepted first and then common. And oftentimes I know society wrings its hands like it's horrible, the divorce rate, and it's unfortunate because it racks people's lives and everything, but it is, it just means you're not stuck in an unhappy situation, you know? A lot of divorces, people just like, this just isn't working anymore. How do we split, go our separate ways, and not destroy our kids while we're doing it, you know? And that was not the way. Phil and Mina are just doing what society wants them to do, in a sense. So they're not bad in that regard. You're supposed to be married in the eyes of the church. These people belong to the Catholic Church, so it's a different world. I doubt any of you would be dragging a somebody down the aisle, you know. So I think it's a great question as to whether they're good. They certainly don't feel good, do they? Right? We don't like them when they come in. That's for sure. Yes.
Did the author, would the author say there were bad people, or like the practice is bad?
So
all of this happened, which caused his life to go.
that is a great question. And last night, after talking about it all day long, I realized that I don't know a ton about Frank McCourt, and I don't know which class I mentioned it in, but I know at least once or twice yesterday. But he blames in this book really all of his troubles in the whole world on the Catholic Church. Okay, and I never really. It's obvious. And so last night I got on YouTube just to see if there were any interviews with him, and sure enough, it was easy enough to find. He was being interviewed in 1997, just a year, the year that this book was the hit, the #1 seller, the Pulitzer Prize. And they asked him things. And to answer your question, Aiden, about whether he would look down upon those ants, he would not. I don't think so. He would bash the church for turning out people like that. He was very mad and still, at the end of his life, very bitter from what I saw in. I gathered that from the book, but even in the interview, he said he was disgusted with the Catholic Church. But he did say that he had contacts with many good brothers or monks, you know, or monks and brothers are kind of almost like teachers. You know, they were part of the order, and they a lot of times taught the classes. They had a lot of good experiences with those guys, but there's a lot of negativity about the head priest. And if you read the whole book, he's very condemning. And the Irish Catholics are, you know, they're kind of hardcore in that regard. If you not every Catholic priest was like this, and Catholicism in different parts of the world is a little different, but it was a different world, you know. Religion was much more, it was less tolerant of all things, you know. Religion's become much more tolerant in the last 30, 40 years, okay? You know, even just recently, the Pope of the Catholic Church announced that there could be same-sex unions, and that they're welcome to come to church. If they adopt kids or have kids, bring them in. I mean, that's radically different than this world. You know, Frank McCourt would be scratching his head, probably wondering, where was that, you know, in 1930? But again, we have to remember that was 90 years ago. You know, so those are great questions. Alexander, question or comment? Back there. I couldn't hear you. Take a look, and if it comes back to you, raise your hand, okay? And I'll come back to you. All right. Who else who wants to give me a comment on again, reaction or question? Yes, Audrey.
I think that Angel and Malachi had any sort of like relationship at all.
Based upon the book, it doesn't feel like it at all, right? I did cruise to the movie just a little bit. I'm actually going to stop. I'm going to let Olivia talk, so I'm not talking the whole time. And I'm not going to ignore that question. I'm going to come back to it. Olivia.
Just kind of answering Audrey's question, like, he was talking about like in it was towards the beginning, like after the kids were born, not like the very beginning, but when he would like come home with, I don't remember exactly what it was. I don't know, but the author was talking about how they would come home and the dad would sing and they would dance in the kitchen and like they seemed like truly happy. So I feel like it was when he wasn't drunk. that
Yeah.
they were
And of course, what's the event that tipped it all off?
the death of
The death of the daughter. He goes off the deep end with the death of the daughter. And so there was, I'm sure, some bit of a relationship, but it was, again, Frankie McCourt's trying to remember this when he was, all these events happened to him when he was relatively young, and he wrote about them, you know, he waited till towards the end of his life to write it, you know, and in the interview he said he had been retired for 10 years, and people told him for a long time, you should write all that stuff down, all of his stories. Nobody would want to hear it. Who would want to hear about my miserable life, you know, and he's like, he goes, when they published the book, I was kind of happy. I thought some people might read it. He never dreamt in a million years that it would be what it was. It was quite the sensation. My first experience with it was at a library. I listened to it on audio driving on vacation, you know, and I would encourage you guys, what a great way to experience a book is you have a library membership and all you got to do is live somewhere. If you're alive and walk in with your address, you get to check it out to you. That's the beauty of that system. But you can download books on tape, that's an old expression, right? Audiobooks on your phone and listen to them. And some of these things are just, besides, obviously they have a good reader doing it, right? Sometimes it's the actual author reading it. And then sometimes they make productions out of it. Well, they'll actually get 5-10 people in there and they do it, and they have different voices. And it just comes to life. And this book, as you guys read it, when you read it, it reads very quickly. It reads like someone's talking to you. It reads very personable, you know. And I have the movie, and I skimmed through it last night, just kind of reviewing some parts. But I was amazed that chapter 1 takes up, I think, less than 5 minutes of the movie. So when you hear or a teacher tells you, hey, don't rely on the movie, you know, you gotta read it. Sometimes they deviate, like Gulliver's Travels with Jack Black. You're really in trouble if you rely on that. But even as though Angela's Ashes did its best to adhere to the book, you still can only put so much of 350 pages into a 2-hour movie, you know. And after you read a book, or maybe some of you experienced that with Harry Potter. You read some of these Harry Potter books, you love it, and they did great jobs on the movies, but they still only had 2 hours, 2 hours, 15 minutes. And so you're like, what about this? What about this? What about this? They left that out. Oh, you know. I nearly had a stroke after the one, number 4. What was that one? The Goblet of Fire? Oh, that movie should have been 10 hours long, you know. And I was all I could think of the things that weren't on it, in it. Now I watch it every once in a while. I'll catch it and watch a little bit of it. I'm like, yeah, you did a great job with this, but the book is not fresh in my mind anymore. So, Raphael, give me a reaction.
I thought it was really interesting. The father, he would never eat. Like he would just like, even when they have money, I don't think he would like, eat the food they bought with the wage. And I thought another part that really kind of, I don't know, I thought it was kind of odd how he would come home and then he'd line up his 4-year-old or 3-year-old kids and make them swear to die. Like, for
when you're drunk on Jameson's whiskey, I mean, you do strange things when you come stumbling home at night. You know, yeah, you wake them up and tell them, give them a penny, promise you'll die for Ireland. You know, again, we didn't get too much into everything with this because there's so much behind it. There's a whole, not only a whole nation of Ireland's history behind this book, but it's also 1,000 years of Catholic teachings, right? All crammed into, and I have you just read one chapter of it to experience it. I mean, we could spend a ton of time on this, but the father was in the Irish Civil War. He fought for the North, which is the Northern Ireland, not the Republic of Ireland. And the fight was over whether or not they should be part of England, Great Britain, or go all the way part of Ireland. And I think, I'd say in our lifetimes, I think Northern Ireland will end up coming back to the Republic of Ireland because it was all over religion. There were more Protestants in I think it's 6 counties up there, and they basically said, we do not want to be independent. The other counties of Ireland were predominantly Irish Catholic. So that's why, and of course he suffered prejudice for it because he's living in Limerick, which I don't expect you to understand that that's on the southwest coast of Ireland, the furthest distance from Northern Ireland, and you guys don't need to know that, right? But he had trouble getting jobs because they knew his accent right away, you know? Just picture in Ohio, if everybody hated people from Georgia, you know they're from Georgia right away, or Mississippi, Alabama, Louisiana. You know, oftentimes that accent comes right out. You can't hide it. So he suffered for that reason. Elijah, anything, reaction or question from yesterday?
Wasn't there something where some drunk guy dropped a kid?
Yeah, so that's Angela's brother, Pat. He's a little slow, special needs. I mean, that's kind of the indication, but they say he was dropped on his head, and he was always something wrong with him after that. Who knows if he was really dropped on his head or if he was just kind of on the spectrum or whatever, or if he really did suffer brain damage younger. I mean, we're relying on some sketchy history here. How about, speaking of history, how about the history that I asked you guys to read? Any notable facts out of there or questions out of there that, go ahead, Autumn.
I was kind of like, okay, so in it was saying how, like, there were rumors that, like, the priests would rape the nuns and, like, kill the kids that came out of, like, those relationships.
Okay. That was in that history?
Yes.
I gotta review that again. I would say now, was that rumors that Americans were saying about the Catholic faith?
I think so.
Okay, that makes sense. All right. Yeah, you have to understand the fear that Americans had of Catholics. All right. As a Catholic, I find it comical today, right? But again, it's 150 years since these guys started coming. America is founded on the principles of freedom of religion. We know that. You hear that all the time. But one of the things you don't know, right, and I don't expect you to know, you know the foundations come of that from the Pilgrims, right, Thanksgiving, and all that mumbo-jumbo, right? The Pilgrims are Puritans. The Puritans that came here from England were led by a guy named Oliver Cromwell. Oliver Cromwell was such a radical nut that he cut the King of England's head off. He was a parliamentarian that led the revolution that was ultimately the English Civil War, right? Or wait a minute, I think I got some sketchy on some history here. So you had, the Catholics and Protestants, Anglicans are going back and forth on who was king. Oliver Cromwell comes in and assumes the throne after he catches the king and beheads him. He was such a terrible ruler, I think it was for a period of 5 or 10 years, that when he died, they actually dug his corpse up and decapitated it and hung it, okay? His followers were basically run out of England. They ended up, I think, in Denmark, and then eventually landed in America. And they are the Pilgrims of the Mayflower, some of those people. They were, by all intents and purposes, radical. some of America's freedom of religion is to freedom from that stuff, right? And this sort of live and let live kind of thing, because you had all these different religious groups come into America, all these different types of Christian religious groups come into America. The Catholics never believed in that. They believe in one holy Catholic and Apostolic Church, and that church is led by the Pope. And that adherence to the Pope and his doctrine in Rome supersedes the country that they live in. That scared a lot of Americans. You get too many of these crazy Catholics here, and they'll take over. There was a huge fear when John F. Kennedy was running for president. What would happen to the country if we let a Catholic run it, right? Turned out nothing, right? So now Joe Biden is also Catholic. Notice no one's talking about that. No one cares that Joe Biden's Catholic. Heck, half the Catholics don't even know he's Catholic, right? It's not an issue today, right? The issue today is sort of the excitement around having a daughter of two immigrants and a woman in the White House. That's a new positive as opposed to a scary negative of Catholicism. All right. You guys have an awesome couple days.